So every time I pick up a book, I try really hard to go in without expectations, but being someone who lives on the bookish internet, that's hard to do because there's a lot of hype and buzz around these books, especially new releases, and sometimes the hype gets to me. So I have a lot of new releases and other backlist books to talk about today. These are books that I went in with expectations, and for good or bad, they turned out to be different than I expected. So I'm going to talk about them here, give you my thoughts, and hopefully help to guide your own expectations going forward. All that being said, let's get started. First, let's talk science fiction, starting with Some Desperate Glory, which is a sci-fi thriller that follows a woman who has been trained from her birth to avenge the people of Earth that have been murdered. And so she is trained in these arts, and we follow her through the years into this mission that she has. And I was really excited because I do love the idea of a good revenge story. But while I found this one very easy to read, easy to follow, quite a page turner, I was surprised that while it is marketed as adult, it felt a lot more like YA in terms of narrative structure. The main characters just feel very young, and it did feel reminiscent of The Blood Trials, which I reviewed last year and didn't completely love. And so in this one, I think it was a fact that the main characters and the surrounding story just felt very simple. So the story actually deals with some major themes and some really big ideas, but they're explored in such a simplistic way that it makes for a very unsatisfying read as an adult. I want a story that is more nuanced, more complicated, and everything is just very black and white. Also, this book had a bit of a YA feel for me because of the fact that it's very dialogue heavy, which is fine. But within that dialogue, they use a lot of very modern language with modern swears, and it just really pulled me on the story because it felt so centered at this point in time in our use of slang and language that it felt hard to believe that nothing in our language has developed or changed into the future. So I just found that to be a little bit distracting. And so while I like this book, you can probably tell I didn't love it. I'll be honest, I was pretty disappointed by it. It was an easy book to fly through, but I wanted so much more from it. Next up is Red Team Blues by Cory Doctorow. This is another book I received for a review from the publisher, and this is my first time reading a book by this author. I've been really interested to try their work and are excited to start with this new release. This is a very short novel, so it's very easy to fly through, and in the story we follow an older man who is a tech genius, so he understands software and hardware, and he is retiring out of Silicon Valley and taking on these other adventures. And within the story, he gets pulled into this type of hacking type job, and the story just spirals from there. So this is a story that involves like crypto technology, hacking, and just a lot of the geeky culture of Silicon Valley. And I love that the story is told from the older person's perspective. It's definitely something I'm really finding myself drawn towards. Maybe as I get older, I want to see myself or my future self in books. So I like this one. I'll be honest, I was hoping for it to have Neil Stephenson vibes in terms of some of the conversations, because I was hoping it was going to remind me a little bit of Cryptonomicon, and I will say it did not, but it was still good for what it was. It just wasn't at that level. So going into this book, just know kind of what you're going to expect, that it's a fun sci-fi thriller, very character focused, there's a bit of relationship back and forth and all of that. It's fun, it's enjoyable. I wish I'd gotten a little bit deeper into some of the science and technology parts. I really love when author geeks out in front of me, and I would have liked more of that. But overall, again, it was an engaging story. I flew through it and would definitely check out more by this author. So if you have read more of their work, love to know what of their backlist I should pick up next. Next up, we have Blood and Bile by Katherine Franklin. And this is a sci-fi book that's actually book 2, but as always, I'm going to keep my reviews spoiler-free. So I'm actually going to talk about book 1, which is called Period. And if you're interested in this series, you do want to start back at the beginning. So this is a space opera that it follows different characters, but specifically we are told the story from the perspective of this woman who right at the beginning of the first book has lost her son in this empiric fire, and she is going off to try to avenge them. And she ends up teaming up with some other characters, and there's a larger plot that ensues. And I actually revisited the first book before going on to the second, but this book actually has a really nice introduction where it kind of reminds you where the story left off if you're not a fan of doing that. But if you're looking for a space opera that is more underhyped but is so worth your time, highly recommend this one. I did the first book on audio, and I fully admit that I had to revisit it because I really wanted to get a better idea of the world building. If you love stories with really interesting interesting world building, this is one you want to check out because the story is very rich, the characters are great, and the plot is very engaging. So it kind of checks all of those boxes for things that I'm looking for. I found the parts involving the empirics to be very interesting. Essentially within this world, certain people have what I would describe as like psychic abilities, and that is tied into it. Sometimes I'm kind of hit or miss when there's more fantastical elements in science fiction stories, but in this one I felt it worked really well because again, the story just felt very grounded. I have a feeling that the author really took their time to map out how everything works, which I don't always get that sense in other books where the world building can be very hollow, which I'll talk about in a future video I have coming up. But in this one, it's just rich. And so I went to book 2. I think I liked it even more than book 1. I enjoyed the story. There's a lot of plot progression. It did not feel like a second book with the usual slump that a lot of authors suffer from. And the ending of this one, the ending was my favorite part. It was so dark and memorable, and I'm often someone who struggles to really imagine what's happening in a book, and it was so vivid on a page what was happening. I was dying. And of course they did confirm at the end of the book, it said to be continued. There is more coming and I desperately need more. So if you're looking for something a little more underhyped, under the radar, this is one I would check out. But again, you do want to go back to the beginning with Empyrean and check this one out after you're done because it's really good. Next, let's switch to some backlist science fiction, and that is The Trouble with Lichen by John Wyndham. This is a book that follows 2 scientists that are doing experiments on this rare lichen they found, and together, or rather separately, they both discover that it has some unusual properties in which it can extend a life of a person. And so I like this book because it explores the complexities of what that would mean, the ramifications, and the questioning of, well, whose life should be expanded, and if humans in general just do expand their lives, what are the consequences, good or bad, in our lives and society, and how will that change our society? So the conversations surrounding the themes were so interesting. And then on top of that, one of the scientists is this woman who does not necessarily want to get married. She doesn't necessarily want to have children. And given the fact that this book was written many years ago by a male author, this book is incredibly feminist in some of its thinking. And I found the main character to be remarkable. I always love unconventional female characters, ones that really subvert the norms of society, and she definitely did. So if you can't tell, I really like this one. John Wyndham is definitely an author I want to read more by. I read The Chrysalids years ago back in high school, and from here I'm definitely going to go on to even more of his work. So highly recommend this one if you want a short, smart science fiction story. This is definitely one you should check out. I feel like it's again more underhyped, even though he's a well-renowned author. So I'd love to hear if you're going to pick this one up. Drop a note in the comments below. Now, switching over to fantasy, let's talk about Untethered Skies by Fonda Lee, another book I received for review from the publisher. And in this novella, we follow a woman whose family is torn apart by a brutal death. There is a manticore that rips apart her family, and she is left alone. And so within the story, she ends up teaming up with a group of individuals that train these other creatures to go and hunt the manticores, and the story goes from there. So this is a simple story in a way. It's more traditional than the other fantasy that Fonda Lee has written. I will admit, like so many other people, I picked up this one because I adore her Greenbone saga, and I knew this wasn't going to be the same, but I couldn't help. I was so interested to see what she would do next. So I will say that if you love the Greenbone saga because it's so unconventional, this one is very traditional in comparison. And if you love the Greenbone saga because it's such a page-turning thriller of a fantasy novel, this one has a much slower pace. However, for being a novella, it has a really good world building system that's built into a few number of pages, as well as some great writing. You have some great character work, and overall it is a very good story. I'll be honest, I just somehow wish that it could have been the Greenbone saga because I wanted it to be another 5-star read, and just based off the story it was good, but it was predictable, it was familiar, it was much more tropey, and so I liked it. I think she's a very talented author, but I really hope that she does something a bit more experimental again, because I know she's capable of that, and I really want more, if that makes sense. And then for backlist fantasy, let's talk about The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. This is a very popular book online, so you probably heard about it, but it's an epic fantasy standalone that now has a prequel. In the story, you understand that we follow multiple perspectives, but essentially it has a heavy sapphic romance at the heart of the story, and it's also a story that involves dragons and seafaring. So it's a book that checks a lot of people's bookish buzzwords, including myself, and so it's one I've been long wanting to pick up. And I will say that I really did like it. I found the story to be very complex. I noticed right from the beginning that the author does not spoon feed you the details of the world. Instead, you have to organically pick it up and follow it along. Once you understand what's happening, though, it does follow some traditional tropes of kind of the evil one, and essentially you find out that the characters have to go on a quest to prevent this evil one from coming back into the world. So it's both simple and complicated at the same time. I liked it a lot. It wasn't quite the 5-star read I was hoping it would be, as other people have found, but I do think it's a solid 4-star. I found it very engaging, and I'm happy to finally know what all the hype about is online, because it was very good. I'm definitely interested in checking out more of this author's work. And finally, for Backlist Fantasy, I want to talk about Vito Nostra, which is a very strange translated book that follows a woman or a young teenager. At the beginning of the story, she's going on vacation with her mother. She goes to the beach, and there's a man who tells her to run every day. After she runs, she throws up coins, which she is then collecting, and this man tells her to do that day after day. And that is just the setup for the story, and I will, without giving away too much, let you know that it turns into a magic school story soon enough. And it's one that I've wanted to read for so long because everyone says it's incredibly dark and weird and strange, and I do see why they say all those things. It's a very uneven narrative. It's a book or a story that it's a very uneven narrative. It's a book or a story that I really feel like I should absolutely love. I definitely hoped it would be a 5-star all-time favorite. And while I enjoyed the weirdness and strangeness of it, I did have more problems than I was expecting to. So I will say that my main issue with this book is the fact that so much of this book is driven by men telling this woman what to do. And not specifically, I have a problem with that, but the fact is that this woman herself has very little autonomy. She just continues to do what she is told to do and follow along, and she does not really progress the story herself. Instead, things just happen to her, which is not my favorite kind of storytelling. So I never really connected with her as a character. I felt like she had no backbone. I wanted her to say no and to actually take some independence in her life. And instead, it was very frustrating. At times I did wonder if that was kind of the point of the story. Maybe it was meant to be a criticism of dark academia and, you know, explaining how these young women are just being molded by these older men. But I don't think the story was actually intending to be that metacritical. Instead, I feel like it was just trying to tell a story and didn't realize how frustrating that would be for the reader. So yes, maybe I'm selling the author short. Maybe there are larger themes and ideas they were trying to come across, but I was kind of underwhelmed by it. There's some kind of interesting reveals at the end of the book, but it really didn't come together for me. I felt the ending was just too ambiguous in what it was trying to do, and I just wasn't super satisfied, if you can't tell. So again, a book that I expected to be a 5-star read, and it really wasn't. And finally, let's talk about a book that did meet my expectations, and that is Hero of Chaos, which is the second book in the Yellow Jacket Revolt series, which again is a historical retelling of the Three Kingdoms story. And this story specifically follows the events that take place surrounding the start of the 2010 TV series of the Three Kingdoms. So I was much more familiar with the events that were happening in this book, and I love the reveals. If I didn't talk about it when I reviewed the first book, is that I like that within the story we are not told it from the perspective of the main characters or those that are vying for control of China, but instead it's being told through the lens of different scribes that are recounting and telling the stories of these epic men. And I've come to really enjoy stories that are told through unusual perspectives when you get something where, again, it would just be interesting to have a perspective of Xiao Xiao, if I'm saying that right at all, probably not. But instead, I find it much more interesting to have someone else having their perspective on Xiao Xiao and having that recounted to the reader. So I love the narrative framing. Again, the prose, the character work, the plotting, everything about this book is just perfection. I want book 3 so badly, but I know that good work takes time. So I'm eagerly waiting the next installment and highly recommend the series. Again, even if you don't read a lot of historical fiction, I don't either, but this one is beautiful. If you just love a good story, you really want to check this one out. So that's it for this video here. I'd love to know the books I talked about. Which ones are you planning on checking out for yourself, or which ones are you planning on skipping now? And I would love to hear, is there a book that did not meet your expectations or just ended up being something different than you thought it was once you actually read it for yourself? And if you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing. I do read a lot of horror, thriller, science fiction, fantasy. If you want to help me out with this video, you can give me a thumbs up, drop a comment, even if it's just a little emoji like a spaceship or a dragon. And if you want to hit that little notification bell, you'll never miss a video from me. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.